On a cold winter night, a homeless woman held the only family she had left, her old German shepherd. She did not ask for help. She did not cry out. She only hoped the night would pass. 3 drunk men laughed nearby. Most people would have looked away. But under a quiet streetlight stood a Navy SEAL who saw what others chose not to see. And in that moment, God placed him exactly where he was needed. Stay with this story. Share it with someone who still believes in goodness. Leave a comment and subscribe so more stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles can be told. Winter pressed down on the outskirts of the town, thin snow clinging to cracked asphalt as a bitter wind swept across an open parking lot. The lot sat behind an aging grocery store that had closed years ago, its sign still hanging out of habit more than purpose. Only one streetlight remained functional, casting a dull yellow circle onto the ground below. Beyond that circle, shadows pooled thick and quiet, broken only by the whisper of snow skittering along the pavement. Ruth Caldwell sat with her back against the concrete wall near the loading bay, knees pulled close to her chest. She was 68, though the cold had shaped her body into something older. Her frame was small and fragile-looking, shoulders rounded inward as if years of bracing against the world had trained her to fold into herself. A heavy coat hung from her thin body, several sizes too large, sleeves frayed at the cuffs. The coat had once been navy blue, but time and weather had faded it into a dull, uncertain gray. Strands of white hair escaped from beneath a knitted hat pulled low over her ears. Her face was narrow, skin pale and worn thin, etched with fine lines that spoke less of age and more of long nights spent awake. Her eyes were soft brown, always scanning, always alert to movement, yet careful not to linger too long on anyone who passed. Ruth had learned that looking invisible was sometimes safer than asking to be seen. Beside her lay Hank. He was a large German shepherd, unmistakably so, even beneath years of neglect. His body was long and powerful, muscles still defined, despite the stiffness that crept into his movements with age. His coat was thick but uneven, black and dark gray tangled together, with lighter silver beginning to show around his muzzle and eyes. One ear stood upright, while the other bent slightly at the tip, the result of an injury long healed but never forgotten. Hank was older now, 9, maybe 10, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of a dog who had known purpose once. His amber eyes remained sharp, constantly reading the space around them. Even when he lay still, his breathing slow and controlled, there was nothing relaxed about his awareness. Hank had not always belonged to Ruth. She had found him 5 winters ago, behind a warehouse near the river, limping badly, ribs pressing sharply beneath matted fur. Blood had dried along one hind leg, and his eyes had followed her every move with suspicion and pain. Ruth had offered him half a sandwich and her only blanket that night. He had stayed. Since then, they had become inseparable. They shared whatever food Ruth could find. They slept pressed together, Hank's broad body shielding her from wind and curious strangers. When Ruth grew tired, Hank learned to slow his pace. When Hank's joints ached, Ruth learned to stop early. They did not speak of loyalty, they lived it. Ruth rested one hand lightly on Hank's shoulder now, fingers curled into his fur for warmth. The dog's body responded immediately, shifting just enough to press closer, a silent acknowledgement of her touch. Across the parking lot, near the edge of the light, Daniel Brooks stood alone. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture straight, even in stillness. A security jacket hung open over a thermal hoodie, the fabric stiff from cold. His boots were worn and scuffed, dusted with salt from long nights on frozen pavement. Daniel's face was angular, defined by a square jaw and sharp cheekbones. A short, untrimmed beard shadowed his mouth and chin, dark hair threaded with early gray. His eyes were narrow, observant, the kind that missed very little. A faint scar cut through his right eyebrow, an old memory from a time he did not revisit unless forced. He leaned beneath the streetlight, one hand tucked into his jacket pocket, the other holding a cigarette between gloved fingers. Smoke curled upward, vanishing quickly into the wind. Daniel had served 8 years in the Army. 2 deployments had taught him how to read danger long before it announced itself. They had also taught him restraint, how to wait, how to observe, how to survive without acting until the moment truly demanded it. After returning home, he had learned something harder: how to exist among people who did not carry those instincts, how to silence parts of himself that no longer belonged in civilian life. The night job suited him: quiet, predictable, little conversation. He had already made 2 slow laps around the building, checked the doors, logged the time. Nothing unusual, nothing worth noting. Then he saw movement at the far edge of the lot. 3 figures stepped out from between parked cars, their silhouettes loose and unbalanced. Their voices carried faintly across the open space, loud, careless, edged with laughter that didn't belong in the stillness of the night. Daniel's eyes narrowed. They were men, probably late 20s to early 30s. One was broad and heavy-set, shoulders hunched forward, his jacket stretched tight across his middle. Another moved with a slouched gait, head tilted as if the world refused to stand still. The third walked a step behind, bottle in hand, swinging it absently as he laughed at something only he understood. Alcohol announced itself before they came fully into view. Daniel straightened slightly, weight shifting onto the balls of his feet. His cigarette burned down to the filter, forgotten between his fingers. He followed their path without moving his head, eyes tracking distance, direction, intent. They hadn't noticed him yet. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they crossed deeper into the lot. Their voices echoed off the empty building, too loud, too confident. Daniel exhaled slowly, a familiar tightness forming in his chest. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. Across the lot, Ruth stiffened. She had not seen the men yet, but she felt the change in the air. Hank's breathing altered beside her, deepening slightly, his ears lifting as his body tensed. Ruth's hand tightened unconsciously in his fur. She looked up. The figures were still far enough away to be indistinct, but close enough to be real. Her stomach sank. Ruth lowered her gaze, instinctively drawing inward, wishing to become smaller, quieter. She had learned over years on the street that attention rarely ended well. Hank shifted beside her, placing his body closer, a subtle movement that did not escape her notice. Daniel took one last drag from his cigarette and dropped it to the ground, crushing it beneath his boot. His eyes remained fixed on the 3 men as they moved further into the lot. Something old and unwelcome stirred beneath his ribs. At the far edge of the light, Daniel Brooks stood still, watching as 3 drunk men stepped into the parking lot, and his instincts, long buried but never gone, rose instantly to the surface. The men didn't approach right away. They lingered at the edge of the parking lot, laughter spilling too freely, voices bouncing off the empty building as if the night itself were part of the joke. Their breath showed thick and uneven in the cold. One of them stumbled, caught himself on a parked shopping cart, and laughed harder for it. Ruth kept her eyes down. She had learned, over years of sleeping where she wasn't wanted, that attention often fed on eye contact. Her shoulders rounded further inward, coat pulled tight with one gloved hand. The other stayed wrapped around the frayed leash looped at her wrist. She could feel Hank's body change beside her, no longer resting, no longer still. Hank rose fully now. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He stepped forward just enough to place himself squarely between Ruth and the open space ahead. His legs spread for balance, claws scraping softly against frozen pavement. The fur along his spine lifted in a slow, deliberate line. A low sound vibrated in his chest, barely audible, more felt than heard. One of the men noticed. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, pointing. "That thing's bigger than my cousin's truck." The speaker was the heavy-set one late 30s, maybe thick neck, bulging above the collar of his jacket. His face was flushed deep red, nose shiny, eyes glassy with drink. His laughter had a sharp edge to it, the kind that came from wanting a reaction more than sharing humor. Another man, thinner and slouched, tilted his head and squinted at Hank. His hair hung in greasy strands across his forehead, dark and stringy, as if he hadn't bothered with a mirror in days. He shoved his hands into his pockets and rocked back on his heels. "Bet it's all bark," he said. "Probably belongs to no one." The third man, shorter, restless, snorted and kicked at a patch of snow near his boot. He held a half-empty bottle by the neck, swinging it lazily. His movements were erratic, confidence rising and falling with each breath. Ruth's chest tightened. She whispered Hank's name again, softer this time. Not a command, a plea. Hank's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but his eyes never left the men. Across the lot, Daniel Brooks shifted his stance. He stayed beneath the streetlight, posture casual to anyone who might glance his way, but his attention was fully locked on the scene unfolding. He tracked the men's spacing, the way they fanned slightly as they talked, how one drifted a step closer without seeming to notice he was doing it. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen this before, different faces, same rhythm, the laughter first, the testing words, the slow narrowing of distance. He told himself to keep watching, to wait. There was still space for this to end without interference. The heavy-set man whistled sharply, the sound cutting through the cold. "Hey, dog," he called. "Come here." Hank responded instantly. The growl deepened, resonating low and steady, a warning built on instinct and experience. His lips pulled back just enough to show the edge of white teeth. Not a threat. A line. Ruth flinched. Her fingers trembled against Hank's collar. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead briefly into the thick fur at his neck, as if grounding herself in his warmth. "Please," she murmured. "Easy, boy. Please." The men laughed again. "Aw, look at that," the thin one said. "Old lady's scared her dog might hurt us." "No," the heavy-set man replied, eyes narrowing with interest. "She's scared we might hurt it." That was when the first snowball flew. It wasn't aimed carefully. It didn't need to be. It burst apart near Hank's front paws, spraying ice and powder against his legs. Hank surged forward half a step, muscles coiling tight. Ruth gasped, her grip tightening hard enough to ache. Daniel took one step forward into the dimmer edge of the light. He still didn't speak. The men noticed him then, not clearly, not fully, but enough to register another presence. The heavy-set man glanced over, eyes flicking toward the streetlight, then back to Hank. "What, we got an audience?" he called out. Daniel didn't answer. He watched the thin man bend slightly, scooping snow into his hands, packing it with exaggerated care. The movement was slow, deliberate, meant to be seen. "Don't," Ruth said suddenly, her voice louder than she intended. It cracked in the open air. "Just leave us alone." Her plea landed flat. The snowball sailed past Hank's shoulder and shattered against the wall behind Ruth. Cold powder sprayed across her coat, melting instantly into damp spots. Hank barked once sharp, explosive. The sound echoed across the empty lot. Ruth's heart slammed hard enough to steal her breath. She wrapped both arms around Hank's neck now, fear rushing hot beneath her ribs. She knew that bark. She knew what came after if things kept moving in this direction. Daniel's instincts surged, louder than reason. He measured the distance again. Too far to grab, close enough to matter. The heavy-set man laughed, louder than before. "See? Told you it bites." The thin man stepped closer, boots crunching. "Relax, we're just playing." But his eyes said something else. Hank planted himself harder, body rigid, head low, gaze fixed. His growl returned, deeper now, threaded with strain. Not aggression. Defense pushed to its limit. Daniel felt the moment tighten. This wasn't drifting anymore. This was converging. He took another step forward, boots leaving the full circle of light, his figure becoming clearer against the snow. The men noticed him properly now. "Hey," the restless one said, squinting. "You work here or something?" Daniel didn't answer. He kept walking, slow, deliberate, until he stood close enough that his presence could no longer be ignored, close enough to be part of the scene. Behind him, the streetlight hummed. In front of him, a line had been drawn. The kick landed harder than Ruth expected. The man's boot struck the side of her canvas bag, sending it skidding across the icy pavement. The sound was sharp and hollow, followed by the soft scatter of what little she owned. An empty thermos, a pair of worn gloves, a plastic-wrapped sandwich half crushed on impact. Ruth lost her balance. She went down on one knee first, then the other, palms slapping against frozen ground. The cold bit instantly through her gloves. Pain flared along her wrist, but fear drowned it out. She looked up, breath tearing in her chest. Hank exploded into motion. He surged forward, body snapping tight, claws scraping furrows into the ice. The growl that tore from his chest was no longer low or restrained. It was raw, forceful, carrying the weight of years spent protecting one fragile human against a world that never slowed down for her. The two men closest to him laughed, startled but emboldened. "Easy, boy," one of them said, voice mocking. He was the thinner one, his grin crooked, eyes shining with the careless cruelty that came from knowing he wasn't alone. He stepped closer, arm lifting as if to test the dog's reaction, fingers spread, hovering inches above Hank's head. "Don't!" Ruth screamed. She scrambled forward on her knees, wrapping both arms around Hank's neck, her body folding over his shoulders. Her cheek pressed into his fur, damp with melting snow and breath. She shook violently, not from the cold alone. "If he bites you," she cried, voice breaking, "they'll kill him. Please, please don't." Hank froze, not because he wanted to, but because he felt her weight, her fear. His muscles quivered beneath her arms. His teeth remained bared, breath coming fast and hot in the air. The heavy-set man barked a laugh. "Look at that! Dogs all talk." He nudged the fallen bag again with his boot, watching Ruth flinch. The movement was small, almost lazy, but it carried intent now. This was no longer a joke, drifting too far. It was a decision being tested. Across the lot, Daniel Brooks let the cigarette fall from his fingers. It landed in the snow at his feet, the ember dying instantly with a hiss. He didn't look down. His eyes stayed locked on the scene, pupils narrowing as his body shifted into something older, something trained. He stepped out of the streetlight's glow. The wind caught his jacket as he moved, flapping it once like a signal flag. His boots crunched with measured weight, each step deliberate, unhurried. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his hands. He simply entered the space. The men noticed him fully this time. "Hey," the restless one said, his grin faltering. He was shorter than the others, jittery, with a face that couldn't decide whether to sneer or smile. He clutched the bottle tighter now, knuckles pale. "What's your problem?" Daniel stopped several paces away. Up close, the hard lines of his face were clearer, jaw set, beard rough and uneven, eyes steady and unblinking. The scar through his eyebrow caught the light. He looked like a man who had learned to stand his ground without posturing, someone whose stillness carried weight. "Pick up her things," Daniel said. His voice was calm, low, stripped of emotion. It didn't ask. It didn't threaten. The thin man scoffed. "Or what?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He glanced down at Ruth, still clinging to Hank, her face streaked with melting snow and tears. He saw the way her fingers dug into the dog's fur, as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. He saw Hank's restraint stretched thin, held together by loyalty alone. Then Daniel looked back at the men. "Or you stop," he said. "Right now." The heavy-set man stepped forward, chest puffed out. He was taller than Daniel, broader, and drunk enough to mistake size for control. His breath reeked of alcohol and old smoke. "You some kind of hero?" he sneered. "You don't even work here." Daniel met his gaze without blinking. "No," he said. "I'm just someone who's watching." The words landed heavier than expected. For a brief moment, no one moved. Snow whispered across the ground. The hum of the streetlight buzzed faintly behind Daniel. Then the thin man laughed again, sharper this time. "Relax, we're just messing around." He reached out again, too fast, too close. Hank snapped. Not forward, not into flesh. He lunged sideways, jaws clamping shut inches from the man's hand, teeth slamming together with a crack that echoed across the lot. His bark followed immediately, loud and violent, shaking the air. The man recoiled, swearing, stumbling backward. Ruth sobbed, her arms tightening reflexively. "Hank, no!" Daniel moved instantly. He stepped between them, placing his body squarely in the space Hank had just claimed. He didn't touch the dog. He didn't grab the men. He widened his stance, grounding himself, shoulders squared. "That's enough," he said, voice firm now. The restless man raised the bottle halfway, uncertain. The heavy-set man hesitated, bravado flickering as calculation replaced laughter. The thin man stared at his own shaking hand, suddenly aware of how close it had come. The balance shifted. Not resolved, not yet, but altered. Daniel could feel it, the moment where choice still existed, where the night could tip either way. He held his ground, breathing slow, eyes alert, waiting to see which decision they would make. Behind him, Hank stood rigid, chest heaving, eyes burning past Daniel's shoulder. Ruth pressed her face into his fur, whispering his name over and over, like a prayer. The bottle shattered before anyone could stop it. The restless man, the shortest of the three, eyes glassy and unfocused, lost his grip as he stumbled forward. The bottle slipped from his hand, struck the edge of the curb, and broke open with a sharp crack. Jagged glass skittered across the pavement, catching the yellow light. He froze for half a breath, then bent and snatched up the neck, its rim uneven and dangerous. Ruth screamed. The sound tore from her chest, raw and desperate. She tightened her arms around Hank, fingers locking into the thick fur at his scruff, pulling with everything she had. Her knees slid on the ice, coat darkening where snow melted against it. Tears streaked down her face, freezing at the edges. "Hank, down, please!" Hank surged upward anyway, not forward, not into the man. Up. His front half lifted, chest expanding, teeth bared fully now. His eyes burned amber under the streetlight, fixed on the glass pointed at him. It wasn't rage that drove him. It was the simple, brutal math of survival. Threat recognized. Barrier failing. Protect the one who cannot run. The man with the bottle laughed once, high and sharp, a sound that didn't belong to the situation anymore. He lifted the glass higher, arm shaking. "Back off," he slurred, though his feet kept inching closer. Daniel moved. He didn't shout as he closed the distance. He didn't rush blindly. He angled his approach, placing himself between Ruth and the man in one smooth motion, boots sliding half an inch on the ice before he caught his balance. His shoulder turned just enough to shield Ruth without fully turning his back on Hank. The bottle jabbed forward. The glass struck Daniel's jacket near the collarbone, skidded along fabric, and scraped skin beneath. Pain flashed hot and sudden. Daniel didn't flinch. He stepped in, crowding the space, forcing the man to either commit or retreat. The man shoved him. It wasn't a clean push more of a drunken lunge, but the ice did its work. Daniel's boots slipped. He went down on one knee, palm slamming against the frozen ground to steady himself. Behind him, Hank's growl detonated. It wasn't just sound. It was presence low, thunderous, vibrating through bone. The dog surged forward until Daniel's outstretched arm stopped him short. Hank's chest heaved, breath tearing out in harsh clouds. His teeth snapped once in the air, not in warning now, but in pure demand for distance. "Enough!" Daniel roared. The word cut through the night with a force that silenced everything else. His voice carried the weight of command, honed in places where hesitation meant death. He was back on his feet now, stance wide, knees bent, arms loose but ready. His eyes locked on the man with the bottle, not angry focused. The heavy-set man took an involuntary step back. Up close, Daniel could see the calculation flicker across the man's face. The grin had vanished. His breathing was fast, shallow. The confidence he'd borrowed from alcohol was evaporating under the sudden clarity of consequence. "Drop it," Daniel said. Not loud. Absolute. The thin man, who had laughed the loudest earlier, stared at Hank, then at Daniel's blood-darkened collar. His bravado collapsed inward. "Man, this is getting stupid," he muttered. The restless man hesitated, arms still raised. His hand shook harder now. The glass glinted, slick with condensation, and blood he hadn't noticed he'd drawn from himself. Then the sound arrived. A siren. Distant at first, almost mistaken for wind. Then unmistakable. The echo bounced off buildings, growing louder, closer. The men heard it at the same time. The restless man dropped the glass. It clattered across the ice and slid to a stop near Hank's paw. The thin man swore under his breath. The heavy-set man turned sharply, scanning the lot like a trapped animal. "Run," someone said. They didn't argue. Boots pounded across snow as the three men scattered in different directions, slipping, recovering, disappearing into darkness. Their laughter was gone. Only the echo of hurried breath remained. Daniel exhaled, long and controlled. His shoulders dropped a fraction. He kept his position, eyes tracking the empty edges of the lot, until he was certain they were gone. Only then did he lower his arms. Ruth collapsed forward. She folded over Hank's shoulders, sobbing into his fur, breath hitching in broken gasps. Her hands shook violently. Hank stood motionless beneath her weight, the tension draining slowly from his body. His ears lowered. His growl faded into a low whine, then into silence. Daniel knelt beside them. Up close, Ruth looked smaller than she had before. Her skin was blotched with cold and fear, eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. He could see the tremor running through her hands, the way shock was beginning to settle in. "You're safe," he said quietly. "They're gone." She nodded, though it was clear she hadn't fully processed the words yet. He didn't bite," she whispered, as if explaining, as if that mattered more than anything else. Daniel glanced at Hank. The German shepherd met his gaze, chest still rising fast, eyes sharp but no longer burning. A thin line of blood marked Daniel's jacket where glass had scraped skin. Hank's nose twitched. He leaned forward a fraction, sniffed, then sat back on his haunches with deliberate restraint. Daniel gave a short nod. Sirens wailed louder now, lights flashing faint blue and red against the far buildings. Daniel stayed where he was, between Ruth and the night. Silence returned to the parking lot in fragments. It arrived first as absence, the absence of laughter, of footsteps, of threat, then as sound again, the distant hum of traffic, the soft hiss of wind dragging snow across concrete. Blue and red lights washed briefly over the buildings as patrol cars swept the area and moved on. Their sirens fading into the night. Ruth sat where she had fallen, arms wrapped around herself now that Hank no longer needed shielding. Her body shook in small, relentless tremors that had nothing to do with the cold alone. Shock settled slowly, heavy and disorienting. She stared at the ground, eyes unfocused, as if the pavement might tell her what to do next. Hank remained on his feet. He stood squarely between Ruth and the open lot, head lowered but eyes still scanning, muscles tight beneath his rough coat. His breath came in short bursts that steamed in the air. He did not relax, not yet. Daniel took a careful step closer. He moved without haste, palms open, shoulders loose. He understood the space animals needed after fear, the way adrenaline lingered in the body long after danger had passed. He stopped at Hank's side, angled so he was visible without looming. "Easy," Daniel said quietly. His voice was different now, lower, steady, stripped of command. He reached out and rested his hand against Hank's shoulder, fingers pressing lightly into thick fur. The dog stiffened for a fraction of a second, then leaned into the touch as if the decision cost him effort. Hank lowered his head. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it mattered. The line of his spine softened. His ears dropped from full alert to cautious listening. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to stand down. Ruth noticed. She lifted her head, eyes filling again. He's okay?" she asked, voice hoarse. "He is," Daniel said. "You both are." The words took time to land. Daniel shrugged off his jacket and draped it around Ruth's shoulders. It swallowed her frame, heavy and warm, smelling faintly of smoke and cold air. She clutched it with both hands, fingers curling into the fabric as if it might anchor her to the moment. "I don't want trouble," she whispered. "I never do." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't cause any." They walked slowly toward the convenience store at the corner of the lot, its fluorescent lights harsh but welcoming. Inside, the heat hit Ruth hard enough to make her sway. Daniel caught her elbow, steadying her without comment. Behind the counter stood Marta Alvarez, a woman in her early 50s with sharp cheekbones and tired eyes softened by habit. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, streaked with gray at the temples. Years of overnight shifts had given her a posture that was always braced, always ready. She noticed everything. "You all right?" Marta asked, already reaching for paper cups. Daniel nodded. "Hot water? Soup, if you've got it." Marta didn't ask questions. She set the cups down, added packets of sugar, slid a plastic bowl of soup across the counter, and turned her attention to Hank. "He's a big one," she murmured, not unkindly. Hank sat beside Ruth, back straight, eyes alert but calmer now. Steam curled around his muzzle as he sniffed the air. Daniel paid, then guided Ruth to a small table by the window. She cradled the cup in both hands, sipping slowly, color returning to her cheeks in increments. A short time later, an ambulance pulled up outside. Evan Porter, the EMT who stepped in first, was young, mid-20s, with a lean build and a face still unlined by exhaustion. His movements were careful, voice gentle, as if he understood how fragile people could feel after fear. He knelt beside Hank, keeping his gestures slow and visible. "Mind if I take a look?" Evan asked. Ruth hesitated, then nodded. Evan examined Hank's legs, joints, and shoulders with practiced hands. He noted old scars, stiffness in the hips, the way Hank favored one hind leg when he shifted weight. "He's been trained," Evan said quietly to Daniel. "Working dog, probably abandoned when he got older." Ruth's eyes filled again, but this time with something like recognition. "He's always watched," she said, "even when he's tired." Evan smiled faintly. "That doesn't go away." Daniel made a call while Ruth finished her soup. He spoke to a winter outreach coordinator, gave the location, explained the situation in plain terms. There was no embellishment, no heroics, just facts. When he hung up, Ruth was gripping his hand. "Thank you," she said. Her skin was thin, fingers light but insistent. "I didn't know what else to do." Daniel met her gaze. "You did enough." Outside, the snow fell softer now, flakes drifting down instead of cutting sideways. The lot looked smaller, less threatening under the glow of store lights. Hank stood close to Ruth, posture protective but no longer rigid, as if the night had finally loosened its grip. Daniel stayed until the outreach van arrived. He watched as Ruth and Hank were guided inside, warmth waiting for them beyond the open door. Hank paused at the threshold, turned back once, and met Daniel's eyes. There was no growl, no challenge, just acknowledgement. Daniel nodded. Then the door closed, and the van pulled away, leaving tracks that filled in slowly behind it. Weeks passed, quietly and without ceremony. Winter remained, but it softened. The long-term shelter sat on the edge of town, a converted brick building that had once been a warehouse. Its windows were tall and narrow, glass clouded by age but intact. Inside, the air smelled faintly of detergent, coffee, and something warmer routine. Ruth now had a small room on the second floor, no larger than a storage unit, but it had a bed with a real mattress, a heater that clicked softly through the night, and a door that locked. For the first time in years, Ruth slept without one eye open. She still woke early. Habit did not vanish simply because safety arrived. Her body remained thin and slight, shoulders still curved inward, but color had begun to return to her face. The deep lines around her mouth softened when she smiled, now small, tentative smiles that surprised her as much as anyone else. Her white hair was brushed more often, pulled back with a simple clip someone had given her. She wore clean sweaters that fit her frame instead of hanging from it. Hank adjusted more slowly. Age did that to him. The shelter staff had registered him officially as Ruth's companion dog, paperwork replacing years of invisible existence. A veterinarian confirmed what Daniel had suspected. Hank had once been a working German shepherd, trained for security or patrol. His joints showed wear consistent with long service. His hips ached in cold weather. His hearing was still sharp, but his movements were measured now, deliberate. He wore a thick insulated vest outdoors, dark green with reflective strips along the sides. It looked strange on him at first, but he tolerated it with the patience of an old professional. His coat had begun to regain its depth, the gray at his muzzle standing out like frost rather than neglect. He followed Ruth everywhere inside the shelter, not because he was anxious, but because that was how he understood his role. Daniel returned on a morning when the sky hung low and pale, clouds pressed flat against the town as if weighing it down. He parked his truck outside the shelter and sat for a moment before getting out. His reflection stared back at him from the windshield, same angular face, same scar through the eyebrow, same quiet tension carried just beneath the surface. He was leaving town that evening. A temporary reassignment had come through for his security contract, a job 2 states south, better hours, better pay. Temporary, they said. He hadn't argued. Inside the shelter, Lydia Monroe spotted him first. Lydia was in her early 40s, tall and spare, with cropped auburn hair and a posture shaped by years of moving quickly between other people's crises. Her skin was pale and freckled, her expression direct but kind. She wore a clipboard like a second limb, and spoke with the calm efficiency of someone who believed deeply in small, consistent help. "You must be Daniel," she said, extending a hand. "Ruth's been asking about you." He shook her hand. "Just wanted to check in." "She's doing well," Lydia said. "Both of them are." They found Ruth in the common room, seated near the window with a mug of tea cradled between her hands. Hank lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but alert enough to notice the moment Daniel stepped into view. Hank lifted his head. He rose slowly, no rush, no sudden movement, and crossed the room with measured steps. His gait was stiff at first, then smoothed out as he reached Daniel. Without sound, without hesitation, he pressed his forehead gently against Daniel's thigh. Daniel froze. The contact was simple, heavy, earned. He lowered a hand to Hank's neck, fingers sinking into familiar fur. The dog leaned in for a moment longer, then stepped back and sat, dignity intact. Ruth watched, eyes shining. "He remembers," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "He always will." They spoke for a while about the shelter, about Hank's checkups, about nothing in particular. Daniel kept his answers brief. He didn't explain why he had come. He didn't explain why he was leaving. When it was time, he stood. Ruth rose too, surprising herself. She reached for his hand, her grip firmer now than it had been weeks ago. "You didn't have to stay that night," she said. "A lot of people didn't." Daniel met her gaze. "I saw you." That was all. Outside, the winter air bit clean and sharp. Snow drifted lightly, settling without urgency. Daniel walked back to his truck, shoulders squared against the cold. Behind him, through the glass, Ruth watched him go. Hank stood beside her, steady, no longer needing to guard against the world. He rested his weight evenly on all four legs, eyes calm. The winter had not ended, but it no longer belonged to them alone. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire. They arrive quietly through ordinary people who choose not to look away. That night, nothing supernatural appeared in the sky. No voice spoke from the clouds. But a frightened woman was protected. A loyal dog was spared, and a man listened when his heart told him to step forward. Perhaps that is how God often works, in parking lots, on cold nights, through small choices made by tired people who could have stayed silent but didn't. Every day we are placed exactly where we are needed, even when we don't realize it. A moment to help, a moment to stand, a moment to see someone who feels invisible. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment with a word that describes how it made you feel. And subscribe to this channel so more stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles can reach the world. May God bless you, protect you, and remind you that even the smallest act of kindness can become a miracle in His hands.